Woodsy Rose, and today we're going to be talking about Liminal Verses, collected poetry from 1986 to 2016 by Bruce Alderman. And the first thing I'll say is I enjoy this collection because it feels like I'm on a long walk with Mr. Alderman. Mr. Alderman works at the integral stage with Layman Pascal, and I've always enjoyed speaking and learning and listening to him and from him. And at Voicecraft, he's done some wonderful work. He had a great conversation with Graham Dempsey, and I enjoyed the chance to read and to enjoy his poetry. It feels like we're walking through the wilderness, through going on a long journey with him through the years, through his own spiritual development, through his thinking, and you get the impression that his thinking develops with his walking, and that his walking is participating in his thinking. Had my pockets been bigger, I'd have climbed in to die, but this guy isn't Ymir's skull, I thought. It's empty, but it isn't dead. You'll notice throughout the poetry collection plays on words like that, empty versus dead. Something can be empty, but that doesn't mean it's not necessarily dead. We're breaking apart some of those associations we get so used to in life, and subtle allusions like Ymir's skull. Ymir, through the poetry collection, there'll be various theological concepts that come into play, symbolism that pops up, but is not overly played on. And I stopped in a corpse beside the water and held my knees in numb, dumb hands and shivered in the silence of the sun, high and white above the wood. I like the idea. I stopped in a corpse beside the water, as a corpse, but I'm occupying a corpse that needs new life, and there's a baptismal image there of going into water and getting to new life, and until you get into the water you can't be born again. And I stopped in a corpse beside the water. I find the poetry quite subtle, like little words like in versus as, and I stopped in a corpse versus and I stopped as a corpse beside the water. So there's this double move of sort of there being life inside of a body, but the body at this point is a corpse that could come back to life, but that is yet to be decided. And there's this kind of idea, and held my knees in numb, dumb hands. But of course there's the question, if you stopped in a corpse, to what degree are they your knees? Dumb hands grasping at this corpse that you're in that's not yours. What you see here is just in a single stanza all of these very interesting plays on terms and ideas that are in play. And I like, so this is swans, and then the next poetry, pine and straw. It's also quite interesting because the poems, although I know they're assorted, have a feeling of a certain journey to them, even when the next poem, pine and straw, refers to asking his mom. So, and turning in the pregnant silence of that holy night to ask my mother if God is the same as universe. There's a childlike image there to read the whole part. Sitting with my family in the dark, warm room, nestled in the secrets of pine and cinnamon. That's a beautiful image. Squinting my eyes at the blinking stars on the tree till their fire was thrown across the room like Roman spears, and turning in the pregnant silence of that holy night to ask my mother if God is the same as universe. What's so lovely about this image is that we start in the stillest moments are spent under trees. And there's a combination of going into the forest, going into the wilderness with a Christmas Eve, where you have the pine tree in the living room, and these images are all kind of coming together and overlapping with one another in ways that makes me think of, say, the beginning of Bert Norton by T.S. Eliot. I always like the opening of the four quartets, where the imagery of past, present, and future all overlap. You have an empty... you have this empty area, spring, fountain for water that's suddenly being described as if the water is coming from the light, because in the narrator's memory, these things kind of come together. And I was thinking of that as I read this. And it is also very interesting to ask my mother if God is the same as the universe. So you're in the wilderness or you're in the living room asking this question. And that seems like an appropriate question. It also makes me think, I think the old story is that Martin Luther came up with and I don't actually know if this is true, but I always liked the story all the same, that idea that Martin Luther was walking home from church one night and he looked up at the stars through a tree in the winter and came up with the idea of the Christmas tree. It made me think of that. And then it ends with the shining at my feet, Lady Victory. These really subtle associations that come together. I would also note this interesting stylistic choice that Mr. Alderman uses with a double space in some of the poems. So let me make an example here. The very first poem, Mountain. I followed sun-lined trees, and then there's a double space, and birds plunge deep in mountain life, up the rugged side, double space, wrestling, roots and stones to find the same red earth, double space, same white sky. The double space is interesting because it's almost like a struggle to progress in the poem. But something that I found really interesting is you can kind of read the lines double space together, and birds wrestling, same wide sky. There's a vertical dimension that this double space effect creates. It feels thematic with the poems up the rugged side, wrestling. It gives that breadth. It's a little more powerful than a comma, but it also gives the poem a different flavor. I've not seen this, and it's almost like the poem with the double space effect it has multiple paths going into the poem, which does feel appropriate. The collection is also called Liminal Verses, verses at the edge, and there's something about that double space effect that feels like crossing a limit. It doesn't happen in all the poems. Sometimes it occurs, but when it occurs, it feels it adds a very interesting effect. So I like that. I also think, like on this next poem, Forgiveness, I know the land coyotes track where angels tread, down the dry creek bred by black root trees, twisted by a century's wrestling. I like that as well because the first poem, up the rugged side, and now we have down. So there's this kind of going up and going down, but you're also following the water. I know the land coyotes track where angels tread. I also like, so for example, this is, in my opinion, good writing, where, the famous line where angels fear to tread, he doesn't add the fear to tread, he leaves that hanging. So you don't know if where coyotes track, if the coyotes are angels, or if that's a place where they're not afraid, or if it's a place you should be afraid. So it kind of connotes this notion of fear, suggesting there's nothing to fear where the coyotes are because the angels tread there, and yet you would associate coyotes with fear. So it's almost like there's nothing to fear. And the poem is forgiveness, as if forgiveness is the act of not being afraid of something you should be afraid of because it hurts you. So there's something very interesting there, and I think that's just a nice move in the prose to use a line where angels tread to associate with the famous line where angels fear to tread, without being overly overt. Twisted, and I also like by black root trees twisted by a century's wrestling. And I like, so the first poem, there's wrestling going up and there's wrestling going down, so there's a certain wrestling all around. I like that. I know the night's coyotes cries and angels cross at the moon's slow drop from the naked dark, silent by my noise and so fierce. I like the idea of a fierce silence. I do not seek forgiveness in this empty place, just lightning and the fierceness of its face. I like that as well. So this notion of lightning as beauty. So rather than forgiveness, you're looking to nature, but then there's also like you're looking for that kind of serenity and peace that can be found in nature, the beauty of nature. But then it's lightning, and that's fierce, right? So there's a double move going on there. And I think Bruce Alderman is using in this poetry nature in a manner to express complicated emotions, and how emotions kind of wrestle together, come together in ways that are not captured by simple words like sad or happy. Human life cannot be explained using words like happy or sad. It tends to be a mixture. A word like beauty we describe as piercing, so there's something violent about beauty and wonderful about beauty. And I think he's using the landscape in a manner to sort of get at that much more complicated emotional landscape, which of course is a more complicated spiritual landscape as well. Here, another poem, Wide Quiet Morning. And again, I stress, I spent my childhood walking in the mountains. And it felt like going on a journey. I really did, going through these poems. I felt like I was with Mr. Alderman as he was going about, on his journeys through life. And I really appreciated that about the collection. Here, where the river drips Sanskrit from the mouths of rocks, and the hawks swing blue above the mistletoe, and the dropped sun does nothing on the water's face. Where I sway by plum-colored currents, thin as grass and mad as a hermit, mad with prayer, in a hovel of trees, where dumb by water I am caught in the mountains shout. I like also here where the river double space drips Sanskrit, so you have this kind of, it's almost like you feel the water hanging on the rock and then drip, drip. So the double space adds that effect. I think also Sanskrit is very nice. Sand, there's sand script, so there's an alliteration there that works very nicely. And I really like, and the drop sun does nothing on the water's face. That's really lovely. The idea that like a coin on water, it would disturb it, but there's a kind of magic, a kind of miracle, you could even say, in the fact that the sun can drop on a water's face and do nothing. Thus is the magic of reflection. And I think that's a kind of image that suggests what reflection does when it's best. It manages to drop in on something without disturbing it. O'Hara of the Winter Line, I always loved his music. He said his hope in entering a forest was the ability to walk through it and make it seem as if he was never there. I think there's something here about contemplation and wisdom that suggests something similar. Can we use our wisdom to leave something undisturbed? And it just made me think of the dropped sun does nothing on the water's face. There's a lovely use of double space for that effect. And dirt, my words dropped with the coes of crawls in the wide, quiet morning. And I like the idea of two words dropped, the sun dropped. And there's this question of the words did nothing as a prayer. And one would think if it's a quiet morning that the words were not verbal. So there's an idea that something about prayer is a silent speaking, which is like the sun dropping on water without disturbing it. The dry creek bed leads to where the land makes a church. So again, we're considered the cathedral of nature, of his journey in the rocks, in the mountains, in the wilderness. Everything here speaks of everything else, and nothing intrudes upon the other. I think that goes back. You see in nature, I think, how wisdom is supposed to be. The ability to contemplate without disturbing, which is like the sun upon water, which is like the prayer. And I think that that image comes back on the notion of the cathedral. It's tying together. Stalking the poem, this is a great one. I take to the woods to track images, let the conversation begin. So it's the hunt, looking for a poem, looking for words. And you can see this entire poetry collection as stalking the poem. The poem emerges out of the stalk, the stalking, the going out. So this was quite lovely, looking for the images of nature. I enjoyed that. And I also like an empty bowl, and he ends it with an empty bowl, an open mouth, on the idea that an open mouth is an empty bowl to receive something. But it leaves us to the question, the mouth that's struck dumb, if you will, open, that state of being struck dumb is to be an empty bowl. It's to be precisely what you need to be to receive something. So I like that couplet at the end that brought together the image of an empty bowl and an open mouth. On the way to the ruin, there is a tree, you will know it. Murder or prayer has soaked the soil there. The whole tree leaps and dives on one spot. The drawn down branches, stripped of frivolous leaves, brush the earth and finger subtle air, as you must have swung in a circle in a sacred field and swept the tips of high grasses with an open hand. It is holy here, long wood, like a widow's hair, hung in grief. That's a beautiful poem, and it's just full to the brim. Raven, a womb wall, something snaps thin as a womb wall to the narrow room cool. It's just full of wonderful prose, wonderful writing. A lot of plays on words. There's this one here where he talks about, in the war of my rejection, crawl till I fall, face down in the mud of the shore, warm as a nest of birds, and breathe and beat my heart. The double on crawl feels like crawling, so the word matches the meaning, the medium, the form matches the meaning. I might have died. There's a nice word play there. I highly suggest the collection. Much more can be said. I really enjoyed reading it. I thought it was profound, and like I said, it's really something you could pick up if you just wanted to go on a walk, and you could easily enjoy. You could just pick it up and feel like you're on a journey with Bruce Alderman. So I appreciate him writing this and sharing this. For more by Bruce Alderman, please check out the Integral Stage. He does wonderful work over there. I enjoy his wisdom and have learned from him, and I appreciate him. And thank you so much for your time.